So Limerick are back into the All-Ireland final for the fifth time in 6 years after a 224 to 118 win over Galway at Croke Park. And watching the game on from the Hogan stand here, it was pretty clear after, midway through the second half that what we saw from Galway early in the game when they went 112 to 1-6 ahead, that was by the 25th minute, that what we'd seen early on in the game wasn't really a true reflection of how the game was going, because Limerick were missing some easy chances. Obviously, they got that great goal from Aaron Gillane at the start of the game. He'd been picked up by Grode McInerney, but whatever in terms of like his movement out the field a little bit, maybe Dahi Burke slipped back in a sweeper, and then he was marking Gillane for a second, and Gillane caught a brilliant ball over the defender's head after a ball in from Tom Morrissey, who was very good again. He had a couple of misses, but got a couple of points, and of course, he was taken off after 55 minutes and Cathal O'Neill came in. So imagine having to pick him up after taking on Morrissey for so long. But to come back to the point that Galway were 112 to 1-6 ahead, but you felt they should have been further ahead. And they probably wouldn't have been, only for Limerick were so inaccurate early on in the game. Cian Lynch had some misses, Grode Hegarty, Tom Morrissey. There was a lot of uncharacteristic misses from Limerick early in the game. And obviously Galway did very, very well to establish themselves, and they were winning ball on the front foot. And Éanna Murphy, whose puck outs, his disguise, he's able to disguise it till the last moment. And several times he found men completely on their own in advanced positions up the pitch. And whether a score came off it straight away or allowed someone to assist, that was really hurting Limerick in the first half. And it looked like Limerick were trying to hold their shape a little bit and not allow those spaces. But Galway were working it really well, and obviously they had energy in early parts of the game, but they definitely faded out of it. And the options that were there for Murphy in the first half just didn't seem to be there in the second half. One thing I'd be critical of Galway about was in the second half, a lot of the time they had the ball around midfield or around their own 65. And there was times, like I'm sure people who were watching at home, and maybe people who were here as well, they watched at times and thought, okay, Limerick have absolutely swarmed the backline. Anytime the ball goes in, there's no space and there's no point in even hitting it in there. But there were several times when there was actually a lot of space back there, and there's a 1v1 or a 2v2 in there, and the ball didn't go in. There was a couple of times I was nearly pulling my hair out, even though obviously I have no skin in the game, but I was pulling my hair out because I was like, let the ball in there. Galway are going to need to get a goal to arrest the slide here. But to be fair to Limerick, the way they used the ball, especially as the game wore on, and Grode Hegarty worked his way into the game a little bit. Cian Lynch did some good stuff, even though obviously wasn't his best performance we've ever seen. But there was 12 different scorers on the Limerick team, and it was just the spread across the board. Obviously, Aaron Gillane with the crucial stuff there. He scored 2-6, just 5 of those frees, so 2-1 from play again, and he's right up there at the top of the conversation for hurler of the year at this stage. Conor Whelan was very good in the first half, got a brilliant point in the second half, 3 overall. And Kincannon was great for the first half, and the second half not so much. And obviously Cathal Mannion's goal was excellent. But Kincannon was lucky not to get red carded, because he did swipe across Barry Nash, and he was very fortunate to get away with that. I'd be interested to see if there's a retrospective ban for that. But yeah, that was a little bit wild. But yeah, I just feel that Galway, like, they lost from the 25th minute on, they lost the rest of the game by 15 points. And the one thing that might have changed things a little bit was Kevin Cooney soloed through, like, he's a brilliant ball winner, soloed through, could have had a shot himself. Maybe he thought he was going to get hooked. He gave it on to Brian Kincannon, and Mike Casey had got back on the line like any good defender does, and obviously he's a brilliant defender. And he'd had a tough time early in the game, but he got back on the line and he just had his arms out. And obviously when Kincannon whipped across it, he didn't know where the ball was going. But the harder you work, the luckier you get. He got back in position. You know, he had spread himself out. It hit the boss of his hurley. That would have made it 2-12 to 1-7, which would have been a huge lead at that stage, because there was only 5 minutes to half time. But instead of Galway getting a huge boost going into the half, they ended up kind of almost praying for half time, because Limerick hit 6 of the last 7 heading into the break. And this was a Limerick who had missed 5 of their first 8 shots in the game. And the second half, then it was just total, would you call it capitulation or from Galway, or strangulation from Limerick? But Galway only created 11 chances in the second half compared with 24. Like, Limerick scored 112 in the second half. They got more scores than Galway even had chances. And it was like in the last, I think, 23 minutes, if you include injury time, Galway only even had 4 opportunities. So out on the pitch, and you don't really blame them either, but they did more or less sort of fold up the tent. And I'm not saying that as a critical thing, because they were just completely, I don't know, beaten down for the last 20-25 minutes. We all knew that the sort of jig was up. And the crucial moment, of course, in terms of deciding the game was when Aaron Gillane got his second goal. And what a brilliant player he is. Like, you feel sorry for no more than Cian Nolan in the Munster final. You felt quite sorry for Grode McInerney. And I actually wouldn't even be that critical of Henry Shefflin for not changing Grode McInerney off him, because no matter who was in there, Gillane's movement is exceptional. He's brilliant in the air, he's brilliant across the floor. And Limerick worked the ball so nicely, and he had players, brilliant players like Darragh O'Donovan feeding in really nice ball. It's just very difficult to know what anyone could do. And you couldn't blame Grode McInerney for either goal, really, because obviously the first one, Daithí Burke was marking him in that moment. And in this one, there was a solo through. The ball was popped to Gillane. He flicks it off the crossbar, comes back out. And Pádraig Mannion, of course, probably had sleepless nights after what happened in the Leinster final when he kicked the ball to Cillian Buckley and then tried to dive without his hurley to block down the winning goal. But of course, he stretches to try and flick the ball away. You can't blame the guy. And obviously flicked this not far enough, and Gillane whips it to the back of the net. And that made it 2-16 to 1-15 after 47 minutes. But the game was dust at that stage. That was all she wrote. But I do think that Galway and Henry Shefflin can be very frustrated with James Owens. Now, he's a good referee, but there was a period at the start of the second half when Galway needed to steady the ship. And Conor Whelan got a brilliant point, which cancelled out Seamus Flanagan's excellent one. But there was 3 frees in a row that were won by Peter Casey, and in at least 2 of the 3, I felt anyway, and watching back the replays, to me, confirmed it, that this brilliant player, Peter Casey, and look, it's nothing against him because it's happening all across the board, goes into contact, grabs onto the man, flops over, tries to exaggerate the contact as well. So again, it's not really calling out Peter Casey, but this is something that we're just seeing time and time again. James Owens bought it on each occasion. I thought 2 of the 3 at least, if not all 3, were exaggerated, and they're killers. And 2 of the 3 were converted. They're absolute killers for Galway because they probably should be frees going in the opposite direction. There was also a period in the first half when Daithí Burke was being swarmed by a few Limerick players, and the referee, James Owens, had his hand up as if he was given advantage or about to give the free, and then did nothing. And then Peter Casey pops the ball over the net after a turnover. So that's hugely frustrating as well. And also, Tom Morrissey made it 1-16 to 1-14. So this was just after the 3 frees that Casey had won. And I thought Seamus Flanagan had taken about 10 steps. Now, maybe on the replay, it'll show that he took a little touch that I didn't see during normal time, but I thought he took a huge amount of touches. So I think that was very frustrating from a Galway point of view, but that's not to take away from Limerick because, across the board, and I've mentioned that they've had 12 scores, including Graham Mulcahy and Cathal O'Neill coming off the bench to score. Like, they were excellent. They started off the game poorly, obviously allowed Galway to go 6 points ahead, but they really steadied down and showed the champions that they are. And I've already said at this stage that I think that what they've done in this short little spell, if you're to compare Kilkenny 06-09 to Limerick in this 4-year run that they've had now, obviously they haven't completed the 4 in a row yet and may not. But I think it's already more impressive because of the amount of teams that they've had to play that are at a very high level, obviously going through the Munster round robin a few times. So I think it's been hugely impressive. And then add in the fact that Sean Finn isn't available to play, that Declan Hannon wasn't fit to play here, so that to rejig the pieces. And there was a little clue in the warm-up when you could see what players were warming up together. So you had groups of 3, and you had Grode Hegarty with Cian Lynch and Tom Morrissey. So you knew that the 3 of those were going to be in the half backline, or certainly it gave a bit of an indication. And you could see Dermot Burns, Kyle Hayes and Will O'Donoghue warming up together as well. And this is often the case that a group of 3 players that are in the same line will warm up together just to get that sort of cohesion between them. But like that, I think that's to the credit of John Kiley, Paul Kinnerk and so on, that they're able to rejig their team and still get a performance. It wasn't perfect, and obviously they'll hope to perform better in the All-Ireland final, but they got enough out of their players. Like William O'Donoghue did fine at centre-back, Darragh O'Donovan very good, Kyle Hayes I thought had another excellent, powerful performance driving forward, and he just, like 2 or 3 players need to be going full speed to try and catch up with him, and generally they don't, but it just puts the opposition under such pressure. And a point that he scored during the second half where he soloed up the field and eventually spooned the ball over the bar, I thought that was a bit of a killer. Cian Lynch had done a 1-2 with him. That made it 2-17 to 1-16. It was just a bit of a killer for Galway, because when you have players chasing 50 yards and they don't get there, and it's popped over the bar, and Kyle Hayes is, sprinting back as if it took nothing out of him. I think that certainly hurts the opposition. But Galway, yeah, tried very hard, but I just think that what happened earlier on in the game was an unfair reflection of the way it was going. Yes, you had Conor Whelan, Brian Kincannon, and Cathal Mannion in the game, and they didn't really show up in the second half. And maybe, like you see, Joe Canning was saying, he felt that the team sat off a little bit, didn't press up high enough, but they were out of juice as well. So I think there was a lot at play, and then just players not delivering the ball inside when it was on, because they were going to need goals to win this game, and ended up losing by 9. And I think it's a fair enough reflection at the end of the game. So get your comments in and let me know what you thought.